everybody, I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is Senator Sheldon Whitehouse. Senator, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me on, Brittany.
The New York Times reported that Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito flew two flags that have been associated with the Stop the Steal movement at two of his different homes since the presidential election in 2020. What's your response to this news?
Well, my initial response was that I didn't think it was real. I thought somebody had photoshopped and doctored the flag of the upside down U.S. flag at the Alito house. That's a measure of how bizarre this is. I never in my life thought I would have to speak the phrase Supreme Court Justice flies MAGA battle flags from his houses. And yet, here we are.
And I want to note that you did say flags. There were two flags. So I want to break down the time frame of these flags and when they happened. So the first one was an upside down flag, and this was flying outside of his Virginia home in 2021 when the Supreme Court was considering a 2020 election case. And the Appeal to Heaven flag was reportedly seen on at least 4 different occasions between July and September 2023 at their New Jersey vacation home. And this was when a case deciding if January 6 rioters can be charged with felony obstruction over their actions at the Capitol arrived at the Supreme Court. So what do you make of the time frame here?
Well, the time frame is that this wasn't just an episode of horribly bad judgment by a Chief Justice. It actually bears on the discharge of his duties as a justice and raises the question of whether he should recuse from those cases. There's a reason that the Supreme Court has a rule for its employees that you cannot exhibit partisan flags, bumper stickers, and other symbols. And when you have a justice who's in flagrant violation of that rule that applies to all the rest of the Supreme Court, that signals that recusal needs to be considered.
You brought up the recusal question, so I'll ask you point blank. Do you think he does need to recuse himself from any case related to January 6th or Donald Trump at large?
I think at this point, his credibility in cases like that is completely shot. And I do think he needs to recuse himself. But I go back just one step because I'm making a bit of a leap when I say that. The leap that I'm making is that nobody has asked any questions about what actually took place. And this is just like nobody asking any questions about whether Thomas paid his taxes on the big forgiven loan for the motor coach, or what was going on with the failure to disclose gifts from billionaires. There's a persistent problem at the Supreme Court that they won't subject themselves to having questions answered about their conduct, which is the most basic thing. So there may be some explanation for all of this. His neighbors may be pranking him. I don't know. But I think he's lost the benefit of the doubt. And I think we're entitled to a real explanation with official questions being officially asked and answered.
This isn't an official question being officially asked and answered, but he did tell Fox News that he had no involvement in flying the inverted flag, that was his wife, and that happened after a dispute with the neighbors. Haven't seen anything on the pine tree flag. What do you make of his excuse there?
First of all, as a married person, let me say, pretty lame to put his spouse under the bus. But more to the point, if your argument is that you are having a fight with your neighbor, that's not an explanation for why you fly a flag associated with the insurrection in front of your house. That may be, you might want to, toilet paper their bushes or send an angry letter, or I don't know. There are all sorts of things you can do with an angry neighbor, but flying a MAGA battle flag at your house, that's not responsive. And then, of course, the fact that he's also flying a different MAGA battle flag at his summer house throws that whole theory into the trash can.
That second flag is the Appeal to Heaven flag, also known as the pine tree flag. And House Speaker Mike Johnson said this about that flag. It's George Washington's flag. It goes back to the founders era. I've always flown that flag. He said that to CNN. What do you make of that?
Well, I think he's overlooking some highly relevant facts, which is that both of these flags, the U.S. flag flown upside down and the pine tree appeal to heaven flag, have been adopted by the MAGA movement, have been adopted by the insurrectionists, and were flown by the attackers who ransacked the Capitol and tried to interrupt the election process on January 6th. So yes, it's nice that George Washington had flags, but that's not the point. The point is that in the modern era, these old symbols have been adopted by this movement. And the idea that they didn't know that, particularly a justice of the Supreme Court, presumably up on current events, doesn't know that, just doesn't pass the laugh test.
You're in the Senate Judiciary Committee. Is the Senate Judiciary Committee planning any action on this, or can they?
Yes, a letter from me as the chairman of the courts subcommittee and Chairman Durbin as the chairman of the full committee went out today to Chief Justice Roberts asking for action and explanation. And obviously he's entitled to a chance to respond, but I don't think this is going away. I think this is also of interest to the Judicial Conference, which is the body of judges that oversees the American judiciary administratively, which includes ethics issues, which are administrative issues. So between the Chief Justice and his powers to administer his own court and the Judicial Conference and its powers, there's going to be more to come.
Ethical concerns surrounding Supreme Court justices, whether it be about receiving gifts, potential conflicts of interest, have been swirling now for recent months. And in November, they released an ethics code. It was 15 pages long. Do you think that goes far enough, or do you think more needs to be done?
To go back, Brittany, to my original point about there's no investigation, nobody finds out what actually happened, they're just allowed to make it up on their own. That's the real flaw here. And if you have an ethics code, even if it's a very good ethics code, but nobody ever decides what happened, no neutral body ever compares the conduct to the rules, there's actually no process of evaluation, of enforcement, then you really don't have much of an ethics code. It's like saying you're going to follow the rules of baseball, except for that part about umpires. So you get to call yourself safe on base, and you get to call your own balls and strikes, and that's just not the way it's supposed to work, particularly not at the Supreme Court, for Pete's sake.
Senator, you've been raising the alarm on this issue for a while. I believe you have upwards of 31 installments of your speeches called The Scheme, where you detail different ethical concerns of the Supreme Court. Knowing this, being someone who's well versed in this situation, what do you think's missing from the conversation?
Well, I think the thing that's missing from the conversation right now is the voice of the Chief Justice, not just as one of nine, not just as a justice of the Supreme Court, but as the Chief Justice with the overall administrative and supervisory responsibility of the Supreme Court. And also missing are the voices of the very distinguished judges who serve on the Judicial Conference. Now, quietly, the Judicial Conference has done some very good things to help clean up the mess, but there's a lot more that needs to be done. And I think it would be helpful if the Judicial Conference spoke out more and picked up the pace of its remedial decision-making.
And what do you think is that number one thing that needs to be done today or first?
Having an ethics code that actually has the key components of every other ethics code everywhere in the country, which is that if there's a complaint, somebody investigates it, somebody neutral decides it, and there's a decision at the end of the day. You don't just rely on the subject of the investigation to say, oh, that's not so, but never have to answer even a question.
Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, I appreciate the conversation. You're welcome back anytime.
Thank you very much. Lovely to be on with you.